I'm an assistant professor here at UMSI. I'm about to enter my 5th year, which is totally shocking to me. I am not a Midwesterner by birth. I am from California, where I was a proud product of a community college. And the part that's relevant for today is that while I was in community college, I started volunteering at a museum called the La Brea Tar Pits in Los Angeles, California. And this experience of volunteering there completely changed my life and career interests and trajectory. I eventually got hired there as a full-time fossil excavator. And so this picture in the middle, if you can see it, you can't tell it, but that's me holding a North American lion skull, which is a giant lion that used to roam the streets of Los Angeles before there were streets. Next to it is a saber-toothed cat humerus, so that's your arm bone. And there's, it's hard to make out, but there's a horse hoof shoved up in its mouth right there. So the La Brea Tar Pits it's this Ice Age fossil locality. The fossils are about 50,000 years old. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. And again, this is where I get carried away from it because this is near and dear to my heart and I'll talk about it forever. Anyway, so I got this job randomly because I was an English major based on volunteering there for years. And I learned a lot about paleontology and biology, but I also learned a lot about the need for better data curation practices in our memory institutions. So my focus tends to be in my research. I spend a lot of time still working in natural history museums. This blue screen computer that you're looking at here is an actual picture of my boss's actual computer not that long ago. So this was from 2008. And this computer should have been put out to pasture probably in 1998, if not a lot sooner. But this was the computer that my boss kept all of our field data in, which represented literally thousands of hours, if not more, of people doing field work and thousands of hours of people transcribing that information into this computer. So this experience of working with this data and seeing the fragility of these knowledge infrastructures is quite literally what drove me to grad school. I went to the University of Illinois because they had this great data curation program, which I am trying to also, and Michigan also has a great data curation program, but I'm really glad to now be able to continue teaching on these topics and continue to do research on these topics. So yeah, that's some background and we'll get back to the tar pits in a little bit. But first, I wanted to lay out the agenda for today's mini class. So my hope is that I'll give you a little bit of a crash course in citizen science for scientific data archives, and particularly my experience working with this Zuniverse platform. Excuse me. So sorry. I'm going to start off with some definitions for those of you that might not be familiar with things like data curation and citizen science. Then give you some context and the method behind, some context of why citizen science is necessary, the methods that we're using in these citizen science projects, and then talk about the implications of this work, both for data curation and for studies of global change biology or other kinds of longitudinal studies. So. Okay, so first things first, I wanted to start by defining data curation. Because this is not even people, even some of my current colleagues in high schools don't necessarily know what we mean when we say data curation. So by data curation, I mean the work of making a data set fit for purpose and preservation ready. So by fit for purpose, I mean just you need to get the data in a shape so that you can do what it is that you want to do with it. That could mean making an interesting visualization, making a map, or it could mean doing some sort of analysis with R. Each of those different kinds of uses or purposes is going to require different kinds of processing on a data set. And that's what we refer to as the data curation. Particularly in an iSchool context or in a library and archives context, when we talk about data curation, we're also talking about the work of making a data set preservation ready. And this is important both for more traditional library and archives concerns of preserving our cultural and scholarly heritage. But when you're talking about preserving data sets, scientific data particularly, this is also important so that we can make sure that our scientific results are reproducible and replicable and will stand up to scrutiny in the future. One thing that I want to make sure to point out is that data curation isn't something, and I'll come back to this at the end, Many of the definitions of data curation out there really emphasize this active and ongoing management of data, or active and ongoing work with data over what's called the life cycle of its interest and usefulness. So the point there is that it's not something that you just do once. It's something that you need to continue to do over the lifespan of your digital collections. And again, I'll come back to this at the end. This has become an increasingly important job for information professionals in a huge range of settings. So I teach classes on data curation, and sometimes it's called digital curation here at UMSI. And I tend to pitch them with the idea that people are going to try to work in like academic libraries, mostly because that's a common use case for a lot of our students. In a lot of academic libraries these days, there are roles like data librarian, or people that are straight up called data curators, research data managers, people whose job it is to work with the researchers in the university to do this work of getting their data fit for purpose and preservation ready. However, the work of data curation is not at all limited to libraries or archives or places like that. Corporations now have people, they might not call them data curators, which is the really challenging part for our students as they try to get out on the job market. But they'll be hiring people to do things like knowledge management or something, but it's really working with digital data and keeping that alive for the entire staff of a corporation or something like that. I enjoy this librarian 2.0 picture of the librarian of the future, who is a robot. Often when I say things like data curation and talk about that in the context of academic librarians, the fear becomes that we're talking about replacing librarians with machines. But really, and again, I'll come back to this, the idea, it's still centrally about people, but people taking advantage of technological tools to facilitate the curation of these digital collections. All right, the second term that I wanted to make sure to define before we went further is citizen science, or sometimes increasingly called community science. So citizen science, we're going to define as the collection and analysis of data relating to the natural world by members of the general public, typically as part of a collaborative project with professional scientists. So if we were in class, actual class, and I had time to prep you all on how to raise your hand with Zoom, this is where I would ask you to tell me if you had ever participated in a citizen science project. So some examples might include the backyard bird count. This is a really popular one. So annually, and this is sponsored by the Audubon Society, I believe. Basically, folks are asked to go into their backyard and observe and count the birds that they see out there. And this information is shared with professional scientists to help understand changing bird populations or migration patterns over time. And this kind of citizen science is something that's been around for a really long time. It's not something that you necessarily need a computer for. It's really the work of distributing scientific observation to a larger team of people than you could use otherwise. These days, and what I'm going to be really focusing on in this talk, a lot of citizen science is mediated through apps or through platforms that are designed to collect the observations that your community is gathering for you. So this is a picture of Seek, which is an app by iNaturalist. So I love this app so much. So, and it's a wonderful example of, it's secret science a little bit, like it's something that's useful and it gets people to participate in the scientific endeavor because it's also helping them out with something. So Seek is an app that you can install on your iPhone or Android or whatever, and it'll automatically identify plants, animals, bugs for you based using machine learning sorts of analyses. It has this massive data set of observations that it's drawing off of. And the reason that I use this all the time, mostly to identify weeds and things in my garden. And that's how they get a lot of their observations. It's people like me, like I am interested in biodiversity, but primarily I want to make sure that that weird thing growing by my azaleas isn't going to take over. So, and this isn't, I highly recommend playing around with this app if you have never tried it before. But anyway, so this is an example of using newer technology to facilitate citizen science. And it's also something that can be embedded in people's everyday lives, yet still contribute to the scientific endeavor. The platform that I'm talking about more today, though, is this platform called Zooniverse. And so this is, Zooniverse has been around for, I think, about 15 years at this point. And the first project, and so basically it's a platform where people upload images, documents, things like that, large collections of unstructured data that they need help making structured. So this is the documents to data sets aspect of this work. There are two particularly famous examples of really, really successful Zooniverse projects that really focused on this idea of getting people, adding what sometimes it's called humans in the loop, to assist with this manual, like with the kinds of judgments, transcription, and classification work that people can do, but machines are not so good at. So the first one that's pretty famous is called Old Weather. So this was a project looking at ship's logs from the, I think, back as far back as the 18th century. So on the left, this is, and I apologize for the low quality of these images, but I can try to, I can at least try to, I'll share all of these links at the end of this, and I'm happy to share my slide deck as well. But so on the left, this is a log of from ships that were sailing across the Atlantic Ocean in the 17th and 18th century. As the sailors traveled, they took measurements of things like wind speed, the barometer, so air pressure, and the temperature. Turns out measurements of sea surface temperature particularly are incredibly important for understanding climate change. And it turns out that this massive collection of ship's logs is one of the best records of sea surface temperature prior to the days when we knew to start measuring things like sea surface temperature. So through this Old Weather project, basically the different organizations shared scans of ship logs and had people go through and transcribe the values for the sea surface temperature for different dates over time. This data has now been incorporated into what the picture on the right represents. So the picture on the right are visualizations of a data set called the International Comprehensive Ocean Atmosphere Dataset, AKA ICOADS. It's a very catchy title. But this is a data set that's used by climate researchers throughout the world. It's one of the most comprehensive data sets that we have of sea surface temperature. And these transcriptions from these Zooniverse volunteers are almost entirely responsible for all of the observations before the 1900. So it's a really, I love this as an example of people making like really important contributions through relatively simple work like transcription to a massively impactful data set. I'm already getting carried away talking about science stuff, so I'm gonna try to speed up a little bit so we have time for questions. Another one that's pretty famous is called Galaxy Zoo, and this is the one where the Zooniverse name pulls from. I think this was the first project that they launched. Galaxy Zoo is a giant project. So rather than uploading scans of field notes or of pages, what these folks at Oxford and the Adler Planetarium did was upload pictures from the Sloan Digital Sky Survey. So these are images of the universe taken with like the Hubble Space Telescope. And what they asked people to do is classify the shape of galaxies. So what they were trying to do is figure out how many different kinds of galaxies are there and what shape are they? And is there any other stuff that's in that's out there that we should pay attention to? So it's a relatively simple classification task for people. We can tell whether something is a disk or if it's a spiral galaxy or something like that. But it's something that computers are not yet good at. The differences between disk and spiral are still too subtle for a computer to make out, so we need people to help make these distinctions. So this project has been massively successful, as evidenced by, so Zuniverse has a long list of the scientific papers that have come out of these different ones. This one alone has resulted in 67 different scientific publications, some of which have like really pushed the state of our understanding of this kind of cosmology forward. So again, this massively impactful work that's done through the assistance of people on the internet who want to contribute to a scientific study. One thing I really like about this project is that on some of these they tried to include all of the volunteers' names as authors in the paper via a supplement, which I think we can talk about that at the end, but I think it's really important to give these volunteers credit for the work that they're doing. Okay, so why do we need projects like this? And for me, I'm particularly interested in them in the context of like natural science repositories, natural history museums, things like that. The context here is that we are dealing with a deluge of legacy data in a lot of these contexts. In the data curation universe, we talk a lot about the data deluge, which means that now that we're using increasingly computational tools and we have this idea of big data, we can access all sorts of massive data sets. We have a deluge of data that we need to curate and work with. What I'm interested in here and what these citizen science projects are largely trying to tackle is the existing deluge that the flood that we never cleaned up of data that we've been collecting over the last hundreds of years in some cases about our natural world that has been diligently recorded in field notes on index cards, things like that, but cannot be studied longitudinally or in mass because it's trapped in paper. We need to turn the documents into data sets, to go back to my overly alliterative talk title. This picture right here is from the La Brea tar pits where I used to work, and it's basically their data deluge that we try to tackle with our project here. It's 60 years of field notes from excavation sites, or from an excavation site in the park that many of which had never actually been moved into a database. So. But before I talk about La Brea, I want to talk about the example closer to home that many of you might be more familiar with, which is legacy data archives here at UM. So I was giving a talk at the evolutionary and ecological, I cannot talk today, ecology and evolutionary biology department about the data deluge at La Brea and my general work in that area. And Karen Olofs from the School for Ecology and Sustainability came up to me and says, I have a project. And the project she had was working on this data archive here at the Institute for Fisheries Research. So the Institute for Fisheries Research is part of the Department of Natural Resources with the state of Michigan. And for more than the last 100 years, people at the IFR have been going out to Michigan lakes and taking surveys of fish populations. By surveys, I mean they go out, they catch fish, they count the fish, sometimes they measure them, they write down what kinds of land conditions there are around them, then they re-release the fish out there. We have more than 30,000 data cards from the Institute for Fisheries Research representing this over 100 years worth of research. And I have a small subset of them on this slide here, mostly to illustrate that, unfortunately, the cards are not all consistently formatted. They have a really wide variance of the kind of information that's captured on them. Some of them have a lot of data about the actual quality of the lake and the pollution levels and things like that. Others focus more on just counting the fish. The great thing about this, though, is that heterogeneous data could be really potentially important in understanding how these lakes have changed, how the fish populations have changed over the last century plus, particularly in the wake of different ways of, particularly in the wake of climate change and other human-led changes to the environment here in Michigan. So that leads to the first project that I'm going to talk about, and I am already running out of time, in which we're trying to tackle these legacy data archives at the Institute for Fisheries Research. So this project is called CHANGES, which stands, and this is a slightly tortured acronym, so bear with me, stands for Collections, Heterogeneous Data, and Next Generation Ecological Studies. I'm going to focus on the fish collections here at first. What we have been, so like I said, this data set is really rich and has a lot of different kinds of data within it. This really rich and multidimensional heterogeneous data set is going to be absolutely critical for understanding how ecological systems are experiencing and reacting to the unprecedented environmental change that they're currently going through. So the kinds of stressors that we're talking about trying to study in Michigan lakes are things like, we talk about climate change a lot, but that's so abstract. There's a lot of things that are much more closer to home that are having huge impacts on our on our biodiversity. So particularly for fish populations, you're dealing with things like hydropower. So thinking about how dams are changing, how streams are running, and how they're changing shorelines. Disease and algal blooms, which have been increasing over the last, just have been increasing in recent years. The impact of invasive species, sometimes as a result of people releasing pets that they should not have had in the first place into natural waters, and all sorts of contaminants and pollution, things like nanomaterials, microplastics, and things like that. So this is a really complicated problem. It's really hard to understand. There's so many potential causes here, and there's so many potential ways of studying this. You need a equally messy and complex data set in order to study it. And so our hope is that this IFR collection of 30,000 index cards has some of that data to start understanding the impact on fish species and fish populations based on all of these different stressors that they're experiencing. So in this project, this project we wound up getting funded through an internal grant from MIDAS, which is the Michigan Data Science group. And our goals through this particular project are to develop data science approaches to curating and analyzing high dimensional, heterogeneous, and noisy data. So in order to answer these scientific questions about what is happening to fish populations, we need to first curate the data. So the thing that I really got excited about in this project is that we're taking data curation as a thing that needs to be done as like a fundamental part of the scientific research that we're doing. It's not auxiliary, it's not something we'll try to take care of later. It is absolutely critical to being able to get this data into shape for us to do this sort of research. We want to leverage this previously underutilized historical data and show how fish populations have changed. And our bonus scientific research question, and this is one that if Karen were here, she could explain much better. We want to test the assumption that ecological patterns across space can be substituted for patterns across time. I'm not going to go into that now. If somebody wants to ask about it later, I can. It's super interesting, but it's a little field of data curation. So over the last year and a half, we've been working on scanning all of these cards. Initially, we only had a very small subset of these scanned, probably only about 400. And we recruited a student through the UROP program, so that's Undergrad Research Opportunity Program, to help us with the scanning and help set up curatorial workflows. And that has led to, let's see, okay. What's my next slide? We'll go to that in a second. I'm going to switch over to the live site in a second. So we've successfully scanned all 30,000 of these cards. The COVID shutdown of campus made us nervous for a while, but we wound up being able to buy a scanner, give it to our undergrad who's been working on this to take to his house. And Kevin Worley, one of my collaborators on this project, has been basically taking boxes of the index cards over to our student's house to do this scanning while we're on lockdown. So it was not great for us. At first we thought that we were really going to be in trouble because of the COVID shutdowns, but we wound up finding a really good workaround. And this wound up being a great way to keep our student employed, which we were really worried about, despite the fact that we couldn't go into our labs in North Quads. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides and instead switch to Firefox so that I can actually show you what this citizen science, what this actually looks like. Okay, so here right now, and I'm going to share this link in the chat also. There we go. All right. So after a lot of scanning and a lot of work thinking about, and this is also something I'd be happy to answer questions about, we've got this project live on the Zuniverse platform. So if you scroll down here, you see that there are two different options for things that you can get started on. And what these represent are two different transcription workflows that we developed to account for the many different kinds of cards that we're working on. In total, we've developed at least a dozen different workflows for people to go through and transcribe values in these cards. We only have 2 of them live right now, mostly to not overwhelm our volunteers and so that we can prioritize getting subsets of the cards that we think are going to be more important for preliminary research. So we could get that transcribed and curated first so we can make progress while things are still getting transcribed. I think what I'll start with though is what are called the fish growth analysis cards. So as you start into the website, it pops up, the first thing you get, I'm logged in with my account, but it still is telling me to go through this tutorial. So, and I'll try to make this bigger. And so we put a lot of work, we developed this tutorial ourselves through a lot of beta testing with our team and with other students that we were working with. And I won't click through the entire thing right now. But it is a really nice feature of Zooniverse is that they will have you go through and you have the capacity to actually build these tutorials. And what this workflow is asking me to do is look through what are called fish growth analysis cards and transcribe the age and size data for one particular kind of fish, in this case, walleye or walleye pike. We've chosen this fish because they're a good indicator species, and it's going to be one that we can basically use as a proxy for other populations, is my understanding. These are questions for the ecologist. So the first thing that we have to do is answer this question of, are there any data about walleye in this card? And I see over here that there's something saying yes, we do have information about walleye, so I'm going to click yes, and I go next. And then it takes me through a process of basically transcribing values for each of these cards. Fortunately, there's only one walleye here, so you don't have to watch me do this for a ton of them. So it's asking me for the number of fish, the length range, 8 to 8.7, and the mean length, which is 26.4. Actually, I think that's not true. That's nothing. Okay. And then I click next. Are there additional age groups listed for walleyes on this card? No. And then I'm done. Easy enough, right? That looked perfect. Now you guys can all go make your own citizen science workflows, right? So the Zuniverse platform winds up looking very polished. And what I just went through was probably a little bit confusing, but if you go through it enough times, it winds up making a lot of sense. And we have an actually very dedicated team of volunteers working on this so far. If you scroll down to our stats, we have 1,462 strangers from the internet that have helped us out on transcribing these cards. They've made what are 126,000 classifications. By classifications, that means transcriptions. That's just Zooniverse speak right there. And we've completed about transcription of 28,000 cards so far. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing this and go back to my slides. Okay. All right, can you see slides again? Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so this is the Zooniverse project so far. Like I said, we have about 28,000 sides of cards done so far. So our estimate is that we're about halfway done with getting these transcribed in these initial workflows. But as you saw, we're only transcribing small amounts of data off of each card. It might turn out that we want to get more data in the future off of these, which means we would have to relaunch the workflow and recruit more people to help us out with this project. We talked a lot about whether or not that was the best approach, but we decided that we didn't want to waste volunteers' time transcribing things for no reason. Rather, we wanted to target the data that we knew would be most useful immediately. And one thing that we've learned through that we found it really important in this project is to build relationships with our volunteers via the message boards and make sure that we're giving them things that they're interested in and show them that we respect their efforts and their contributions to this work. So we're not just treating them as basically like a click farm or something like that. That's transcribing things without having any interest in what they're doing. I highly recommend checking out the message boards. People get really into this. There's a lot of fans of fishing in Michigan. And there's a lot of great conversations about people making their, reflecting back on fish that they've seen, talking about what they think about trends in these communities. It's been really great so far. So like I said, we're about halfway done with this so far. We are currently working on developing further curatorial recipes for what we're going to do with this. So every card in Zuniverse is transcribed 3 times because we need, and that's basically a quality control check. So we have to go through some initial processing to basically triangulate the answers to those 3 different, from those 3 different volunteers and make sure that they're all consistent. From there, though, we need to do additional curation work to process the data from these cards so that it's in a point that it can actually be used in statistical analyses. This is what we're currently working on right now. A lot of this work that we're trying to do in a program called Open Refine. This is my favorite tool to teach in classes these days. The short explanation is that Open Refine is something, it looks like a database, but it gives you the function, or it looks like a spreadsheet, but it gives you the functionality of an actually relatively powerful database combined with a statistical software sometimes. So it gives you the ability to clean up controlled vocabularies or recontrol vocabulary. You can reconcile data according to an external source. So if there are any people working in a library in the room, you can actually, there's apps to hook into like the Library of Congress vocabularies and things like that, so that you can, and subject headings, so that you can reconcile subject headings against an authority file. So we're working with Open Refine to develop some workflows for actually curating this work. Okay, as predicted, I totally went over time. So I'm gonna skip talking about La Brea for now. We can come back to this. I think the long, and I neglected to show the full team for changes so far. And this is really important. So this is a massively interdisciplinary team. Like I said, Karen Alofs is the one that came up with this plan and idea, and I've been guiding the curatorial work with it. But we're also working with Hernan Lopez Fernandez in the University of Michigan Museum of Zoology. Justin Schell has been absolutely instrumental in getting these workflows set up. So Justin has been involved with Zuniverse for years. This is probably the 5th project that he's set up, and honestly, it might be more. But Justin has entirely led workflow development and getting this onto the Zuniverse site. Randy Singer is also at UMMZ, curator of the fish collection, or collections manager of the fish collections, and Kevin Worley at the Institute for Fisheries Research. And unfortunately, I don't have pictures of our awesome students that have been working on this and our postdoc, Caitlin King. But like I said, it's a huge team encompassing multiple university departments, and really it's interagency so far. The team for the La Brea work is smaller. It's mostly me, Justin, and Ashley Farrell, who's the collections manager at the La Brea Tar Pits. I'm gonna skip this for now to mostly focus on the fact that we launched this, so this was literally the project that sent me to grad school, wanting to get this data into a database. We did a lot of prep work, and that's also the interesting things with these projects. We spent months, probably 6 months, getting ready to launch the Zuniverse project, getting the workflows developed, not to mention years of transcribing, of getting field notes scanned and things like that. We were able to finish getting the data transcribed in just about 4 months. So this project is done already. We have no more transcriptions that we need to do with it. Now, of course, the later curation that we have to do is going to take us probably another year because it's really complicated data. But it's been so gratifying to actually be able to get this done. So I'm going to skip that for now. Future directions for changes, once we get this data mobilized and into a more structured format, our plan is to integrate it with museum specimens so that we can build out this data set even more by looking at specimens that were collected at the same, through these fish surveys, and build and basically get some auxiliary data through that. And we also want to demonstrate that our methods are scalable across taxa and collections. So honestly, we want to write a grant to do this with other collections within the university. Through this so far, I think there's some really interesting implications for long-term curation and some lessons that we need to think about when we're building curatorial pipelines. So first of all, the main thing I keep meditating on in this project is that curation, whether it's data curation or just specimen curation, is about long-term care of collections. When I start talking about Zooniverse projects and talk about citizen science, people think that it's basically it's a curate button. Like we have this cool technology, we built this cool workflow, we have a really nice user interface, and once we get done with it, it's done. And that could not be further from the truth. The actual process of getting things transcribed is relatively short, especially compared to the decades-long or centuries-long history of all of these collections. And so the way that I like to view these projects, and I think it's important to view these projects, is that they are the latest step in a really long series of steps, and they're not possible without that traditional museum or archival preservation work. The Zuniverse does not work as like a magic curation button. It's just a new technology. So a lot of these technologies are just new tools for us to use, but they need to be used in consort with our existing best practices. And we need to keep in mind that it's only people that make these work. It's not, we still can't just magically throw it onto a computer and hope it'll work out. I have some goals if for those interested in starting your, or some guidelines for those interested in starting your own citizen science projects. But I think I will leave these for questions. And I'm so sorry that I wound up going over time, but like I said, I tend to I get very eager to talk about these things. So please ask about things if you're interested. I want to acknowledge the rest of the team on this project. It truly is interdisciplinary, and the MIDAS Propelling Original Data Science grant that has been funding the IFR part of this work. So I'll open up for questions now. Thanks, everybody.